There are over 1,000 Pokemon, and some of them are made to be some big losers. Magikarp may be called a virtually worthless and pathetic Pokemon by the Pokedex, but it isn't the weakest Pokemon in lore. We have other examples such as Spoink, whose heart stops beating if they stop bouncing, Salandit, who don't evolve just because they give all the nutritious food to female Salandit, the many different babies like Pichu, who shocks itself every time it uses its power, and Hoppip, who floats without real control throughout the world. So after carefully studying the many Pokemon that would perish at the hand of a child, I can now bring to you the weakest Pokemon in lore. Howdy there, I'm Krillic, and we're going to dig right into this. Each section of this video digging into weaker and weaker Pokemon. We start out with the Pokemon that are deceptively weak or are only weak in special case scenarios. The ones that you look at and think they'd have no power, but would turn around and actually crush you. The very first Pokemon on this list is Unown, a Pokemon that, when alone, has next to no power whatsoever, but when grouped up, brings about reality-changing effects that can rival even the most powerful of mythical and legendary Pokemon. They've been around for an incredibly long time, but with next to no documentation before the times of Hisui. Though, if we look at the anime, we can see a number of different versions of them from Professor Oak's computer. I've claimed that they are effectively the many thousand eyes of Arceus. After all, they are the only other Pokemon than the Origin Trio and Arceus to appear in the same inky black void that exists between their realms. And with so many in one place, we know that their odd power emerges and they're able to change things like times of day, create duplicate Pokemon, and just shape reality as we know it. This has happened in both the anime movies and the animated series, making it a consistent power that they have, even though the closest we get to seeing this in the games is when they appear during the time when Arceus shows us the creation of the universe and creates an egg containing Dialga, Palkia, or Giratina, depending on which one you chose. It's genuinely wild to consider that these Pokemon are so powerful, but we know so little about them. But they do tell us one thing, and that is when all lives touch other lives, they create something new and alive. While that is something I love in the emotional sense, it's also massively representative of who the Unown are. Creatures who are all individual lives that come together to shape the universe as we know it. Bulbasaur is only considered weak in one version of the Pokemon games and not in any other form of lore that we are aware of. The game I'm speaking about is Pokemon Snap, where we get to see Pokemon enjoying nature in peace until we throw a million apples at them and bother them as much as we can. Nevertheless, when we read that game's version of the Pokedex called the Photodex, it says, when Bulbasaur is born, it lives for a while via photosynthesis and the nutrients in the seed on its back. Until it grows bigger, it is dependent on other Pokemon to survive, which you might say is more about Bulbasaur's friendliness and social behavior, but we also find it and Pancham being closely cared for and even carried or guarded by a Drampa in this game. And if you mess with them, then Drampa gets pretty angry. Even though this is only one version of Bulbasaur that is this way, it does let us know that there are likely many different Pokemon that do need help from others in order to get by. Cubone would be another fantastic example, but it really has a tough time in Alola, not because it's weak, but because of the sheer number of powerful water and grass type Pokemon. Either way, Bulbasaur is known to be a pretty peaceful little Pokemon that cares for others altogether, and does a great job with caring for children in particular. And as it continues to grow up and evolve, it will only serve to protect those that helped it grow up. Espurr is a timid, adorable little thing that does its best to avoid others as it struggles to control the psychic power within itself. But despite this struggle, it isn't exactly a weak Pokemon. Espurr consistently tries to hold its ears down because their power will leak out and potentially release this energy in a massive burst that can go as far as 300 feet or 90 meters in radius, making it 600 feet or 180 meters in a full diameter. Imagine a sphere of psychic energy that large, and it is also fit with enough strength to, as Pokemon puts it, send a pro wrestler flying. To put that into perspective, the full diameter of this would effectively be about as tall as the Space Needle, or 2 football fields, or even more accurately, the 600-foot deep Ubehebe crater in Death Valley, which is probably something that Espurr could create. And as a side, this crater was not made by a meteor, but rather because of magma that got too close to the surface and caused water to flash into steam, then causing large amounts of pulverized old rock and new magma to flow through the area. It's basically an eruption or explosion in its own right, and I'm, again, sure Espurr could easily create another one if it ever lost control of its powers and they built up too much. Because to make matters worse, it is constantly struggling to control those powers and needs to release their powers regularly, or else it can pass out. And you can imagine what happens if it does pass out. So again, another small Pokemon that seems like it would be on the weaker side, effectively showing just how deadly it can be, or that it is, by accident. Whismur is honestly a little more sad than anything else, as it seems like a perfect little ball that could be punted around, but the last thing you want to do is frighten it at all. And I'm not just saying that because it's one of my favorite normal type Pokemon. No, Whismur are timid little species, being easily frightened by loud noises. Whismur's murmurs are barely audible, but when it senses danger, it lets out an ear-splitting cry as loud as a jet plane taking off. The cry of a Whismur is about 100 decibels and can cause an all-day headache should anyone be near it. And because it's startled by its own cries, it will then only cry louder. And when it finally stops crying, it will fall asleep from exhaustion. Because it breathes through its ear canals, it can actually just cry continuously. However, it will stop crying if its ear covers are shut, and to top it all off, they typically live inside of caves. Imagine being a creature startled by loud noises, getting scared, screaming with enough power to cause people to go deaf without any hearing protection at all, scaring your other Whismur friends and family because you startled them by getting scared, and everyone screaming as loud as they possibly can, and even causing yourself to get more scared because you're screaming, your brother's screaming, your cousin's screaming, the random neighbor that your mom keeps telling you that you should go see and talk to because they've known you since you're a baby is screaming. Everyone's screaming until everyone falls asleep from exhaustion. They make up, by the way, 30% of the population in any cave they're in, except for in Rust Turf Tunnel, where they make up 100% of the random encounter rate, this being their normal habitat. Should be no surprise then that no other Pokemon is found there except for Geodude, whenever you decide to smash some rocks, since, you know, Geodude kind of doesn't have any actual ears and is one of the only Pokemon that can cohabitate with that many Jet Scream children. So sure, you could probably bop a Whismur, but they're gonna make sure you don't hear anything for the rest of your life if you startle them in your approach. And actually, I'm pretty sure with it being that loud, it might actually cause internal organ damage, because all that screaming and talking and all that stuff is just vibration of air, effectively, just to oversimplify it. And if it's that powerful and that many, it might cause organ damage without even actually touching you. Audino and its Mega form are the peak examples of taking all of your strengths and turning them into healing powers for others. The feelers on its ears act like stethoscopes in that it can feel the beat of another Pokemon's heart in order to assess the Pokemon's feelings and overall physical condition. The feelers are also able to determine when an egg is close to hatching, and it has an incredible sense of hearing where it can even hear a rolling pebble from a mile away, and it is said to have a kind heart. They're strong advocators of health, and there is a side quest in Legend ZA where a trainer is constantly harried by their Audino until she realizes that she's been working too hard without breaks, and the Audino just wants her to relax and take a break for her health. Give me an Audino. Give everyone an Audino. They are the epitome. Whatever one it is, I've been confused about that word for years, of healthcare workers everywhere, and they even love taking care of their patients, so how could you not love them? Actually, now that I think about it, it's actually wild that they were added to the Pokemon world with the release of Unova, you know, the country, or rather region based on New York within the United States, a place rampant with obesity, overworking, and a major caffeine addiction pandemic. That's just like all of the United States, to be fair. But of course, if this wasn't enough, And when we pump Audino full of Mega Power, it goes above and beyond, deciding that it would rather take on all of this energy, and instead of using it to fight, would rather use it to continue to help others. Mega Audino can release pulses that reduce hostility, and anyone who touches the secondary feelers that have sprouted from the base of its throat will fall into a deep sleep. Yeah, it's effectively earned the power of anesthesia. Remember, everyone, the anesthesiologist doesn't get paid to put you to sleep. They get paid to make sure that you're given just the right amount that you don't wake up during surgery, and that you are actually able to wake back up afterwards. Pretty important. Though, despite all this and everyone seeing this Pokemon as a bag of experience, it does have the capacity to throw hands, and you absolutely should not risk fighting it. It might just put you to sleep and, again, not let you wake back up. Salandit is seriously in need of an evolution for the male species, and there's a legitimate canonical reason as to why it doesn't evolve. This is because while it's serving its queen Salazzle, or at least female Salandit at the time, it is giving up all the most robust and nutrient-rich food to the females, leaving the males with nothing but scraps. This ultimately leaves them without any of the energy necessary to evolve, but you'd at least expect a Salandit raised from an egg wouldn't fall under this issue and actually evolve with the right care, but no. This has been going on for so long in their species that it must have become a deeper genetic problem that then removes the male Salandit evolution and results in it being able to just better consume anything that falls into its mouth, becoming a very opportunistic omnivore. Having the ability Corrosion is a massive help because then it can poison and break down poison and steel type opponents with its own poison. The poison from this Pokemon is more in tune with said Corrosion as an acid, something that is produced in the saliva to help heavily break down things that it then eats. And to boot, of course, it also has fire on its side, and there's always a massive swarm of them working together. So while Salandit may seem to be pretty weak Pokemon on paper, I doubt an encounter with them would go well for anyone. Magikarp. I know, you might be surprised to find it here so early on, but bear with me, because with the right conditions, it has the power to output a hit stronger than the force of the Fat Man Bomb. Magikarp is known by the Pokedex as a pathetic, worthless, weak, helpless, lifeless, feeble, pitiful imbecile of a Pokemon, and yes, all of those words are directly used by various Pokedex entries. Funny enough, where every other entry is pretty dark. For Ultra Moon, the Ultra Moon entry is also one of the few that says something more on the positive side about Magikarp by stating, thanks to their strong hold on life, dirty water doesn't bother them at all. They live in waters all over the world. So, Magikarp has at least one fan, probably Kukui, because, you know, Pokedex. Even Legends ZA drags Magikarp through the mud, but the Pokedex in general also kind of lies to us. It tells us that Magikarp can only jump about 7 feet at most. And you and I know that this is not the case, and there are Magikarp who swim up waterfalls, ones that jump over mountains, and have even been able to be trained to jump so high that they can jump into space. To break down the power needed for that is very difficult without oversimplifying it, but that's what I did. By knowing this Magikarp is jumping from the ground all the way up, through the Earth's atmosphere, and at least in one version was nearly able to escape Earth's gravity, we're looking at a minimum speed of 25,020 miles per hour, though that is the speed necessary in order to break free from Earth's gravity. And I will openly admit now that if we make a lot of assumptions and it reaches that height in a single second and actually escapes Earth's pull, then it could have the power of a Fat Man Bomb. Though, more realistically, Magikarp is 10 kilograms, which we break down its velocity to being, let's say, 3,107 meters a second, and let's say you're my height, 5'6", yes, I'm short, meaning that the impact of Magikarp splashing and slamming into your face would be roughly 48,264,656 joules of energy, which translates to 48.3 megajoules, and in other words, Magikarp hitting you at a 5-foot distance would be more powerful than nearly 10 train crashes. Alternatively, it's equivalent to about 9.66 kilograms of TNT, and yes, I did have to look up what that, equates to energy-wise. All this to say that Magikarp is not nearly as weak as it's often said to be, and it very well could cause some immense destruction if it was trained to do so. But I'm not gonna lie to you, the number of times that I look up sketchy information to complete this research is wild. Luckily, when it comes to my security and privacy, there's today's sponsor, ExpressVPN, to help out. I won't lie to you, I love VPNs. I was recently streaming and had an entire conversation about them and how they make sure your data won't get stolen when using public Wi-Fi at the airport or a hotel. It prevents this through the use of an encrypted tunnel that protects your connection from hackers and data thieves, even on unsecured networks. Just imagine a little Porygon traveling alongside your data, batting off Team Rocket. Now, how they hide your activity from ISPs and third parties is by encrypting your internet traffic and masking your IP address, meaning I won't get doxxed by anyone looking to steal a certain Zekrom plush. And of course, a minor thing that I have a strong opinion of is that it unblocks content. It's the internet. I should not have to travel to Bali to watch an episode of my favorite show because some internet platform decided that they wanted to release it a year after everyone else. So look out for yourself, your data, and your entertainment because nobody else is gonna do it for you. And I'm a strong advocate for VPNs. Find out how you can get up to 4 extra months of this service by clicking the link in the description box below or scanning the QR code. Thank you again to ExpressVPN for sponsoring the video, and on with the video. Our next category of Pokemon are the ones that are relatively weak or do no actual harm to others. They're the defensive Pokemon, ones that hide or drift around within the world but still have some control. They might run away a lot just because they know they can't win in a fight. But before we do continue, I just want to say thank you for watching. If you're new, make sure you subscribe, and of course, let me know your favorite weak Pokemon. Honestly, while not on this list, Chikorita is often seen as a weak Pokemon until Legend ZA it's kind of changed, even though hold on, I'm trying to point at her, and she's like perfectly behind. There we go, I figured it out, but anyway, I love her so much, and I want to try something new. And so the best comments or comments from the previous video will be read at the end of this video. You all come up with some genuine gold, and I need to share and encourage your commenting more often. Obviously, if it's a multi-paragraph essay, I'm not reading all of it on video, but I'll at least try to read a part of it. So come up with some good comments. It also boosts the reach of the video. I also want to thank members of the channel and Patreon for supporting the channel. And if you'd like behind the scenes info, early access to videos, and members exclusive videos, become a member for as little as $3 a month. But once again, thank you, and on with the video. Nearly every single Cocoon Pokemon is in this section. Silcoon, Cascoon, Dottler, Spupa, so on and so forth. Though Kakuna doesn't make it into this section because it has a poison spike that comes out of its chest, and Metapod, well, Metapod is a lot weaker than I had originally thought, so we'll get to them later, spoiler alert. Not a lot to say about Cocoon Pokemon though. They're in their most vulnerable stage of life, as their inner bodies are being liquefied and transformed in true metamorphosis fashion to become the Pokemon that we would then see in their final form. Their only way to stay alive being poison powders or high defenses typically, amongst maybe a tackle or a harden here and there. Moving on to talk about Poliwag honestly makes me feel a little bit like a bully because it's no better than a toddler learning how to walk for the first time. This is quite literally the case for Poliwag, as while it might eat plenty of pond scum and seaweed in the underwater areas, it does venture to the surface to get its grub on as well. The problem is that its legs are pretty weak still, and it isn't a good fighter, so it has to run back to the water often. It's even said that if you're a trainer, that you should be working with your Poliwag every single day to help them learn how to walk, which is actually pretty adorable. What also saves it from being destroyed all the time is that while we can see its organs, which is that little spiral on its stomach, the thin skin it does have is so flexible that fangs bounce right off of it. But either way, at least it's not an absolutely defenseless Pokemon as it might seem, and it'll survive to eventually evolve. Misdreavus is completely harmless, not because of its move pool, but rather because it doesn't care to actually hurt others. Instead, it would rather scare people, surprising them so that way it can consume their fear. To be clear, Misdreavus consumes the literal emotion of fear, unless you're looking at the one dex entry which says that it takes life energy after the person it gets scared. Which ultimately, ignoring that though, does make it similar to other Pokemon like Hoppip, who consumes negative emotions. The only issue is that Misdreavus will use any means necessary to frighten people, absorb the fears into the red beads around its neck, and then those feelings are turned into nutrition for Misdreavus. Their favorite way to scare others is just by crying, screaming, and wailing in the middle of the night. Kinda makes me think of the witch from Left 4 Dead, and that's gonna unlock a primal fear deep within anyone who's played those games. So again though, less that Misdreavus can't hurt you, it's more like Misdreavus doesn't care to and just wants to scare you for its meal. Feebas is often considered the opposite to Magikarp, but there's some special adaptations it has that Magikarp doesn't have, at least not inherently. The first of which is that it is an incredibly shabby Pokemon, which helps its survival rate by comparison to its more vibrant evolution, Melodic. See, there's a small theory I do have that every Pokemon actually started out as their final or mega forms, and that over time they became smaller, had less and less of a need for their final form, even their secondary form, and became something more docile, something with less energy, so that way they can conserve energy. And Feebas is a great example of starting off as an incredibly unassuming Pokemon that would eventually become something far more powerful and vibrant, but that would attract so much attention. But that theory aside, while it's stated that Magikarp can survive any environment, we really don't see it in muck-filled environments like rushing rivers or swamps. Those are usually taken up by other fish Pokemon like Carvanha, Barboach, and our Feebas here. This is because they can survive in murkier waters, and those murkier waters have less visibility and less oxygen overall, potentially even higher phosphorus levels, which can harm fish and plants when it's in excess. It's specifically noted, this hardy Pokemon is capable of eating anything and living anywhere. It is often found in oceans and weed-choked ponds, even if only a little water is available. There's also not much different from Magikarp and their own movesets between it and Feebas, only getting Splash, Tackle, and Flail, while also not being hunted by other Pokemon as a source of food, unlike Magikarp. And with no other feats to talk about, it really is about as weak and unassuming as it can get, but with a hardiness that makes it durable enough to survive to become its evolution. I wasn't sure if I wanted to include Seedot in this video, because if I did, then we should theoretically consider the move lists of every single Pokemon before they evolve. Lore-wise though, Seedot spends its time getting water and nutrients from trees constantly, before shining itself so bird Pokemon can carry it away to new locations. Then, when we look at its natural moves, it gets Tackle, Pardon, Absorb, Astonish, Growth, and then Roll Out right before it should evolve. This move list tells us a story, like many other move lists do. Seedot might fight, but otherwise Hardening is its way to shine itself. With Absorb and Astonish both being moves that take energy from others, it grows. And then, Rollout has an animation where it looks like the Pokemon is encased in the rock or dirt that it runs into you with, which we could equate to Seedot burying itself like an acorn. This means it is only strong enough to absorb what it needs and then evolve with no other real capacity for proper combat. This is likely the case for a lot of different Pokemon, but then we get Pokemon like Phanpy, who seems to be unassuming until you find out that they can break a human arm just by playing around and swinging its trunk. So don't go making assumptions that just because a Pokemon is small does not mean that it will not destroy you. Along the same lines of Seedot, we also find Budew, who only has Absorb, Growth, Stun Spore, and Charm. And it knows that it shouldn't be fighting, since we also see it run away at the first sight of us in Legends ZA. Again, we get a story of absorbing nutrients, growing, being a cute little Pokemon which gives it Charm, and then you may wonder where Stun Spore comes from. Well, this is because when Budew drinks cleaner water, it releases more powerful toxic pollen, explaining the Stun Spore that it then has. From here, we're pretty much gonna constantly skip over many of the Pokemon with short move lists like this, and I might actually need to make a video on move list stories in the future, because there's a lot of hidden details in those. Drifloon is one that I almost put lower on the list, because while it is often said to carry children away, it also doesn't always have the easiest time doing so, or just might not be successful at all. For example, if a child is throwing a fit and decides to tug back, then the Drifloon is said to get pulled around instead in some Pokedex entries, not to speak of Drifloon's distaste for heavier children, which you could theoretically call this Pokemon fatphobic, which is hilarious to think about. Nothing else to really say here though, just Drifloon getting dragged away by anyone that's probably heavier than a plush is hilarious, and that isn't really a joke and moreover kind of a reality, because it at least sleeps with a plush in Pokemon Sleep whenever it mistakes one for a child. Morelull is a great example of another Pokemon that you might not see as weak anywhere, except for in your thoughts or through Pokemon Snap. There's nothing that really states that they're weak. In fact, with enough of them, they can release enough spores to affect a plane and cause it to crash, which is horrifying to imagine. especially as the plane would be flying far above the forest. But when we look at it in Pokemon Snap, all it takes is for us to throw an apple at it, and not only does one fall, but the entire conga line of them might end up falling like dominoes. I actually remember the first time that I did that, and while I did laugh, and my live stream chat also laughed, it's also something that they're not going to let go of anytime soon because, you know, you shouldn't bother the wildlife like that. Oops. Wimpod. Do I even really need to actually explain? It literally has the word wimp as part of its name. It is called the Turntail Pokemon, has the Wimp Out ability, are known to be cowards, and will scatter to the wind the second that they notice an enemy in the area. It knows that it is weak, so it runs away. I love it. It's a great Pokemon. But despite all this, the reason they aren't lower on this list is because they are incredibly fast and are able to spit out a poisonous liquid if they're cornered. So I wouldn't bother them. Plus, Wimpod is nature's cleaner, being a great scavenger whose scuttling little legs leaves everything clean in their wake. So they serve their purpose pretty well in our world. Sobble is a lot like Whismur, but it's definitely a lot less dangerous, but potentially more painful depending on the situation. Because just like if Whismur gets scared, it will scream. When Sobble gets scared, it will cry, and the tears that it releases have the potency of 100 onions. I love cooking. I love to cut up some good, sweet onions in the kitchen and let them slowly cook with my food to make them absorb a bunch of those delicious flavors. But every other onion I cut ends up having hands and absolutely smacks me around to the point where I am barely keeping my eyes open, which is very dangerous, and I don't condone cutting onions with your eyes closed. I also just do not want to imagine what 100 onions would be like, as that sounds like I would want to have my eyes removed via ice cream scooper. Luckily, the reason that this whole onion thing happens and your eyes hurt and so on and so forth is because of the enzymes within onions are released as a gas at room temperature, apparently. And that invisible gas then activates the pain receptors in our nose and our eyes, meaning it isn't actually hurting us based on my understanding, but rather just making us feel like we are in an incredible amount of pain and need to get away from the source of the problem, which helps keep the onion alive. I mean, if you keep part of an onion, you'll see that sometimes they'll still grow, even though you've cut it in half or quarters. This, though, is why Sobble is lower on the list than our other Pokemon like Whismur, who are similarly timid in behavior. Because while it and a lot of other Pokemon could cause damage, this is one that actively turns invisible and makes our eyes burn hotter than the surface of the sun to make us avoid seeing and chasing it so that way it can safely escape. Remove Applin from the apple that it lives in and you just have a little worm that is just about helpless. Also worm, W-O-R-M, and worm, W-Y-R-M. Spelling. They live inside of apples because they need it to hold moisture in their bodies, otherwise they dry out and become weak. Little Applin beef jerky, if you would. I know I said earlier we won't talk about movesets as much, but with the only moves in Applin's wheelhouse being Withdraw and Astonish, withdrawing into the apple and bringing nutrients from the apple or other sources into it, you can see pretty easily why Applin is pretty weak in terms of Pokemon overall, and its life isn't going to exactly be the easiest, especially with Pokemon like Noibat eating its fruity home by accident or on purpose. Snom is built to eat snow, and that is it. It's just an adorable little butt-faced grub that lives wherever it snows the most, so that way it can eat the snow and turn it into its spiky exterior that will also eventually serve as its cocoon, so that way it can evolve into Frostmoth, technically skipping the cocoon phase, technically being a worm and a cocoon all at once. In the meantime, as it disguises itself as icicles and calls on Big Mama Frostmoth for help, it finds itself inherently knowing two moves: Powder Snow and Struggle Bug, which is kind of hilarious because that just goes to show just how much this Pokemon is meant to be a solitary creature and struggle against anything else in battle. I mean, it can also camouflage itself to make it look like an icicle, so it's trying to avoid battles as much as it possibly can. We move on to the babies of the Pokemon world, the Pokemon that used to need incense in order to be born if you couldn't just find them out in the wild. They are all adorable, mostly, but fairly pathetic at the end of the day with very few exceptions. We are not judging these Pokemon on their evolutions, we are judging them on what they are at this exact moment. Though this also means that certain baby Pokemon like Elekid, Magby, and Smoochum, that little trio, are actually not included here as they aren't noted to be particularly weak. especially Elekid, who breaks into homes for electricity. One of those exceptions I mentioned as well is in fact Togepi, who I will talk about, a Pokemon that has incredible power inside of it, and I'm not just saying that because it's one of my top 10 favorite Pokemon. And strangely enough, it's one of these select Pokemon that naturally learns ancient power without the use of a TM. Now, Togepi, amongst many other Pokemon, have the power of Metronome available to them, which is terrifyingly powerful, more so than the games like to show us. A good example is when Clefairy is first introduced in the anime, and we watch a crowd of them use Metronome to cause a massive explosion. That aside though, I want to talk about Togepo, a Togepi partnered by Gold in the Adventures manga that became a gambler, a risk-taker, arrogant Pokemon that only reflected Gold's arrogant self and would eventually go toe-to-toe with not just any dragon Pokemon, but specifically Lance's Dragonite, without even needing to evolve. And Togepo won the speed contest of the Pokeathlon on top of that. So it's fun to imagine that Togepi has the capability to be champion level without ever needing to evolve. But of course, that takes some good training. In the wild, they avoid battle and are hardly ever seen, especially as they only appear during times of peace. Wynaut's entire existence is built on taking hits, but it doesn't necessarily dish out any at all unless it's hit first. In fact, it is directly stated that Wynaut crowd together in tight spaces to cause them to bounce off of each other, hitting each other almost like pendulums over and over again, using counter against counter as the hits become stronger and stronger until eventually they are able to retaliate with incredible power and evolve into Wobbuffet. So once again, we find ourselves with a Pokemon that is weak on paper, but lore-wise it's able to really take a hit and send it right back like the cartoon punching bag that it is. Igglybuff's whole defense relies on its ability to sing, but the problem is that it hasn't properly developed its body or throat to be able to sing for long periods of time due to underdeveloped vocal cords. Because of this, it often gets a sore throat and has to live near streams of water so it can gargle it and keep its throat healthy, which honestly isn't going to do much if it's just regular water. The reason why you use salt water is because it will help with reducing inflammation from overuse. Meanwhile, the water just soothes and lubricates the throat a bit for very temporary relief. Speaking as someone who will talk for hours on stream and still record these videos, a good hot tea with honey is best. I primarily use lemon echinacea, I think is how it's pronounced, for my tea. It advertises itself as a throat coat. Maybe Igglybuff could use some so that way it can defend itself from any threats. Otherwise, it's effectively just a free meal if any Pokemon wants to eat a balloon. Bonsly is only here by a technicality, and that's because if it gets too moist, it dies. The same can be said about Sudowoodo, but at least Sudowoodo is able to take care of itself and seemingly run at Mach 5. Meanwhile, Bonsly is shown to need bottle feeding in the anime, as it doesn't have the ability to get the nutrients it needs on its own. Its only defense, other than mimicking its environment, is to look at the one trying to eat or attack it and cry. And if it were to ever be placed in the wrong environment where there could be plenty of rain, then it would die from just simply getting too wet from the weather. But here's the problem. How will you blend in with other trees if there are no trees in an incredibly open and dry environment? The best it might have is by living in savannas or prairies, which is kind of what we see in Paldea at least, so that way it can avoid the rain. But then you're not blending in with anything. Ultimately, Bonsly is just not built for survival and definitely gets more help in the wild from Pokemon like Chansey to survive. Luckily, we also do actually get to see that in action in routes within Sinnoh. Pichu is the last notable baby of the bunch to talk about, because while every other baby struggles to defend itself as you would expect, Pichu can't even use its own abilities without accidentally harming itself. The electric pouches on its cheeks are small, so they cannot store much electricity, and it shocks itself even if a little bit of energy leaks out. However, the electricity is still strong enough to zap human adults despite its small size, but it also still tends to surprise itself when it does that. It can also easily charge itself with electricity in the presence of thunderclouds or dry air, so one can also end up hearing static electricity crackling coming off of it when you are nearby. When it plays with others of its kind, they may end up shorting out electricity and releasing sparks that startle them and make them all cry. However, they also do this intentionally by touching tails to build up their courage. These last details are what keeps it here and prevents me from throwing it into the following sections that we're going to talk about, where I would consider Pokemon to be so weak that a human could defeat them. They can defend themselves to some capacity, but they just hurt themselves in doing so, so it's not the most ideal situation until they eventually evolve and have a better hold of their abilities. We're now in the loses to adults section. This is a bit of an arbitrary title because I just needed to separate these Pokemon from the next category. These are the Pokemon that you could, as the category suggests, go toe-to-toe with and arguably win every single time. Ledyba is the first on this list, known to be a social yet cowardly Pokemon that is active in large groups. If left alone, it becomes timid and afraid to move, which is kind of funny. It's got social anxiety. Look at that. It doesn't want to walk up to the McDonald's front desk that we can order its McThicken. Why was that the word that came out of my mouth? I'm so sorry. It is also very sensitive to cold, so it forms clusters with other Ledyba for warmth, and in warm regions like Alola, they seem quite lively in nature. While this is as far as we go with Ledyba, the real reason we know that it is a very weak Pokemon is by looking at Ledyba, who is directly said to be a weak fighter that prioritizes quantity over quality with its punches. Sure, I might be assuming things here, but if its evolution is said to be weak by the Pokedex, then I'm going to assume that the first form is about as weak as, any other Ladybug might be. I mean, have you seen them? You breathe on a Ladybug wrong, and they just about explode into dust. There's also that one gif of the Ladybug who is blasted by a singular water drop and is trampolined into oblivion. Poor things, almost as cursed as a hamster is. Everyone bags on Luvdisc. Just about every single person is also disappointed that it doesn't evolve into Alamamala, that palindrome of a Pokemon. And Luvdisc is really no better than any other swarming fish in the sea. Though, what can you expect from the Pokemon shaped like a heart? It makes love, not war. And when it finds the love of its life, it will kiss them, and they will fly off together into the distance, their bodies moving like the wings of a butterfly. This is not a joke. This is not being me overdramatic or flowering things up. This is literally what happens. And they can even have polycules with 4 of them together, forming a clover pattern, which makes me imagine them taking off like a little bit of a helicopter, spinning faster than a Beyblade, until one of them launches off and then a Sharpedo jumps out the water and catches it. Is polycule the right word to use? We're keeping it in there. Basically, all of Pidove's information tells us not how weak it is necessarily, but rather just how its weaponized stupidity causes it to be the perfect victim. Pidove is not particularly intelligent. While it always listens to its trainer's commands, it does not always understand them. It is also so forgetful that they will wait for new orders from their trainers even if it had just received them. They will go as far as forgetting their own names and might even forget what scared them in the first place. Living in the city is a blessing to this Pokemon, because if it lived in the wild, it would get scared from a predator in the bushes, forget it, get scared a second time, forget a second time, and then it would be eaten, not even realizing why it's in heaven. Just blink and, oh, what am I doing here? It's not really made for survival in the real world, which is fine. It's a city bird after all. Although, I will say, we gotta respect pigeons, because they were once an incredibly beloved animal. They're also one of my favorite birds that, if I remember correctly, won the most medals, counting at 32 during World War II for their service. And it's stories like that, or ideas like that, that really make me want to kickstart that other channel talking about animal news, because more people need to know about this if they also didn't just randomly learn it from like a Wendigoon video. Tynamo is the only one here by technicality in this section because it's noted to only be able to let out a trickle of electricity by itself. This doesn't mean that they aren't dangerous at all, since directly being electrocuted continuously at all could be dangerous to things like our heart and disrupt its rhythm, and I'd like to just imagine that all we'd need, though, are a pair of rubber gloves, and Tynamo doesn't stand much of a chance. Weak electricity, simple solution, though if a bunch of them do corral together, then it becomes much more dangerous, and yeah, you don't want to touch that. Bounce Sweet is unnecessarily funny because not only is it weak, but also since it bounces around everywhere it goes, hence the proper way to say it being Bounce Sweet or Bounce Sweet, it's mistaken for being happy and playful all the time. To also explain that, I used to always say Bonsly because, of the spelling. Now it tries to resist being swallowed by bird Pokemon by spinning the sepals on its head. It's usually a fruitless attempt though, and that was not a pun on my part, written by yours truly, that was a pun directly in the Pokedex. Once again though, what would you expect of what is effectively a baby? It is still wearing the diaper, it bounces around cheerfully, it is made to perish or evolve. Cosmog and Cosmoem are the weakest legendaries that we are currently aware of, and will probably keep that title for the rest of our lives. And while I love the little space dust nebula, it is adorably pathetic in how weak it is. For starters, much like Ghastly, it can be easily blown away into nothingness. To add to this, its signature ability to be able to open up ultra wormholes puts an incredible strain on its body and might result in not only great harm, but even death. The only thing that Cosmog has going for it then is that it is so adorable that not only do people like Lily keep one of them safe, but also its evolutions fought the Tapus and turned those guardians into babysitters. Now once Cosmog does eat enough space dust to evolve, it becomes a 2,204.4 pound or 999 kilogram Pokemon known as Cosmoem, who is no better than an oversized paperweight. Luckily, it is depicted as floating slightly above whatever is below it, otherwise Lily and Ash would be the strongest humans in the entire world. Hold on, idea just kind of clicked. Video where I try to put weights onto a bar and they would be representative of each Pokemon, getting heavier and heavier as the video goes on. Might be a fun one. The lucky thing is that Cosmoem at least has an incredibly sturdy body, as it's basically in a cocoon of its own as a protostar, making it effectively impossible to hurt, but you know, you could just drop it in a lake and say goodbye. Wishy-Washy is at the bottom of this section because while it is the weakest fish Pokemon in the entirety of the Pokemon franchise that we are currently aware of, wimpy and anxiety-ridden little guy that sits at the bottom of the food chain, it also has its own school form to serve as its defense mechanism. Every Pokemon that eats fish will try to get their jabbers around Wishy-Washy, and even humans were avid fishermen of this easy meal. But if they have enough of their own kind in the area, forming what is called the Demon of the Sea, there isn't a Gyarados or a Whale Lord bold enough to face off with it. So it's all circumstantial at the end of the day. No school form, no chance for Wishy-Washy to come out on top. If that school form is available, their water gun becomes more powerful than a hydro pump. But it is also stated that if it's harmed at all, then it will break apart, forming a regular school of fish and then fleeing away. Which, in the games, they have to be hurt a lot more, as they break apart in the game if they're brought down to 25% of their max health. So give them a hard enough hit and there's nothing to worry about. Once again, assuming you can actually get close enough to hit it and actually hit it hard enough. Our semi-final category is the one in which babies could theoretically fight against these Pokemon and win against. The Acrylic VA franchise does not condone babies fighting Pokemon or babies fighting anything or fighting babies, but it would be pretty funny to see one mindlessly drool their way to victory. Are all of these going to be ridiculous stretches of the imagination? You bet your sweet bippy they will be, but that's where the fun of this is. Abra does nothing but sleep, eat a singular berry a day, and teleport. Its entire life is spent resting in order to reserve and build up the power that it needs in order to evolve into Kadabra. But Abra only teleports when it senses danger, and I'd love to think that the mindless chasm of curiosity within a baby's innocent brain would allow it to get past the defenses of an Abra and bite it. After all, babies do teeth a lot, and biting is a dark-type move. That's going to be my excuse from here on in. Spoink is next. It's nothing but an adorable bouncing piglet with a pearl on its head that helps it control its psychic abilities. Take away that orb, and its powers weaken or become non-existent. Take it a step further with knowing that every spring and bounce of its tail is another heartbeat, and you can easily see a baby grabbing onto little Spoink and accidentally stopping its heart for too long. I also cannot imagine Spoink or stopping its heart without also doing the opposite and playing it like an accordion, which is a horrifying thought, and I should not say that, but oops. Cherubi's entire existence is built around surviving long enough for all the delicious nutrients within its second head to be metabolized and used up. The key thing is that the second head is very tasty and is vital for letting Cherubi evolve. Take that away, and Cherubi will likely never evolve and might even die. It mainly has to contend with birds or Pokemon like Squavit, but a baby who loves the taste of a good cherry is also all it takes to put Cherubi's life in danger. A Flabebe without its flower is a Flabebe without any power. They rely on the flower that they become symbiotically attached to for a greater benefit for the flower in itself, that they also choose in life to give them life and power. Though they will be incredibly picky and survive for as long as they need to before picking the flower that they will keep with them for the rest of their lives. Nevertheless, pop one of these suckers like a strangely shaped marshmallow before it even gets a flower and call it a life. The roaming form of Gimmighoul is no better than Gumby, dragging around a coin everywhere that it goes. We spend the entirety of our playthrough of Scarlet and Violet finding these guys and taking away their coins, but there is a small catch to this. It will drain the life force of anyone who does try to steal its coins, assuming that it doesn't run away and leave its own coin behind. But otherwise, they have no real power to them, and their chest form leaves a lot to be desired as well, since they have no actual offensive capability, just a little bit of energy absorbing and defense until they can collect enough coins to evolve. Babies having Bite as a move naturally. Because of that, I'm going to argue that it's a coin toss on whether they could defeat a Shedinja. Will the husk of a Pokemon get too close to the baby and be bitten, getting destroyed in the process, or will the baby's soul get stolen by looking into the opening in Shedinja's back? I don't know, as it is morally unethical for me to test this out, and I don't care what the league says. I had nothing to do with the events that took place on August 27th, 2019, and I'm ready to move on to our next entry already. Dreepy's info tells us everything we need to know and is the prime reason as to why I made this category a thing in the first place, titling it the way that I did. Dreepy are reborn ghosts of a prehistoric species that once lived in ancient seas. It's also one that existed in real life. Boomerang head, I love it so much. It generally retains the same behaviors it had when it was alive, as it tends to wander the locations where it once lived, as well as biting at Clauncher as if to eat them. Dreepy are exceptionally weak in combat, so much so that on its own, it is strictly stated, a mere child could defeat it. However, it has the potential to become much stronger and evolve if it has friends to help it train. In other words, canonically, the developers of Pokemon have had to contemplate a one-on-one fight between Pokemon and children, which, okay, now that I said it out loud, I guess they've been doing that since the very beginning, since Ash was 10 at the start of his journey, but ignore that. The last of this category is actually Goomy. It is categorized as the weakest dragon Pokemon of all time. Its body is mostly water and is covered by a germ-laden mucus membrane. This slimy layer causes physical attacks to slide off harmlessly. However, it becomes unable to breathe and will die if its body dries out. Because of this, it stays in damp, shady areas like swamps. So even though Dreepy was introduced after Goomy, if it's still considered the weakest of them all, of all dragon-type Pokemon, then it's very easy to say that Goomy just might self-destruct if a child even looked at it the wrong way. This leads us to the most ridiculous set of Pokemon that we will talk about, and it's the self-destruct category. Pokemon that will effectively destroy themselves. They are the tree that makes a noise when nobody is around, and they will make sure everyone knows that it fell. I would also say any Pokemon that learns self-destruct or explode goes here, but many of those Pokemon would have a way to survive or be reborn in some way after their sudden need to reenact what happens when you fill a balloon with dynamite and go boom. Have I become marginally unhinged in my explanations leading up to this point? Yes, but this is normal. I do this all the time on streams on YouTube and Twitch, so, you know, this is my hint to say, come say hi. The first one in this category is going to be controversial, but a Charmander who doesn't pay attention to the weather is going to get rained on and it will pass away. Or a meteorologist that gets the weather wrong then has a lot of Charmander deaths on their head. All it takes is for enough water to douse the tiny little fire on Charmander's tail, and it will no longer be with us, but instead be crossing over the river Styx. This might be a bit much to place it in the self-destruct category, but this is theoretically worse than Bonsly or Sudowoodo, because rain is not the only thing that would likely cause the fire to get put out. Throw some dirt on it, let there be a strong enough wind, you name it. It's reasons like this that I start to realize, though, why starter Pokemon are so incredibly rare. Really need to make a video about all the starter Pokemon sometime soon, especially with, assumedly, Gen 10 coming out. Sunkern is strictly stated to be very weak, and aware of its weakness, it only feeds until it evolves. However, it feeds on only the dew from under the leaves of plants. It tries to move as little as possible since it tries to conserve all the nutrients it has stored in its body for evolution, and if attacked by predators such as a Spearow, it shakes its leaves at the attacker. Oh look, I'm a spooky plant. Look how green my leaves are. That totally doesn't look even more appetizing to you, I'm sure. It's not even actually attacking the predator then, it's just waving its arms around as frantically as possible, really showing off its stuff to make it look more attractive, I would say. Luckily, these Pokemon are able to survive just because a year after a cold summer, there's typically a dramatic explosion in their population. So they're almost like the great Mola fish of the plant Pokemon world, where they don't just die out because there's so very many of them. Poor Joltik was born with a crappy hand. The only saving grace it has is that it's cute and its parent Galvantula will stay close to help baby Joltik out. Whereas many other electric Pokemon can store electricity or eat electricity in general, Joltik can't do either of those things. In fact, it not only needs to still hunt for regular food, but it also needs to get a steady supply of electricity to fuel movement, otherwise it will be unable to move and become a sitting target for any Pokemon looking to eat it. The only solution for Joltik is to be an electricity-consuming parasite, taking energy from Yamper or Jolteon, the latter of which we see in Pokemon Snap. The other solution is to be helped as stated by its evolution, while living in places like Chargestone Cave, which is humming with electricity. Not the worst existence in the world, but definitely one where there's beauty in the communalism within a species, Pokemon, and its evolution, which then allow it to survive. Now we're in the final 3, and they are placed intentionally as the last and weakest Pokemon in all of Pokemon lore to date. Starting with Hoppip, who are very cute cat dandelion Pokemon, but they are also so light that a gentle breeze will blow them away, with the only way for them to defend themselves being to hold onto the ground with their feet or to grab onto other Hoppip by linking their leaves together. But since gentle breezes require effort for them to not be blown away, then a strong breeze will send them to entirely different regions, which is exactly what happens as they can be found all over the world, including their evolutions, except for in colder regions. And speaking of those evolutions, to take it further, this line of Pokemon will grow as any other plant normally would with enough nutrients, water, and sunlight, until they evolve into Jumpluff, who acts like any other dandelion, and when those final seeds disperse from its body, it passes away. There is nothing that anyone has to do to this Pokemon whatsoever. It will live its natural lifespan and then pass away. But one wrong goofball walking up to make a wish on a dandelion is all it takes as they blow away all the seeds from its body and kill it with such a simple act. Me blowing on dandelions, everyone around me watching a Jumpluff pass away. Metapod is one where I thought it would be perfectly fine and I was ready to put it with the rest of the Cocoon Pokemon until I was proven wrong on stream doing some of this research, because there's one Pokedex entry in particular that tells us that no matter how hard a Metapod gets, it can still die from something as simple as being tipped over onto its side. From the Ultra Moon game, we read, its hard shell doesn't crack a bit, even if Pick-a-Peck pecks at it, but it will tip over, spilling out its insides, meaning that any Pokemon looking to get Metapod guts can just tip them over. Just have enough strength to just boop. Imagine like your pet cat just walking over and smacking a Metapod over. Now, don't get me wrong. In hindsight, this makes perfect sense since they are built like a crescent moon. They're built to rock back and forth to ensure they never actually fall over from something like a breeze or an earthquake. But still, you're telling me all a brother has to do is walk over to the defenseless Pokemon, push it onto its side, and it loses its guts and passes away? Imagine a strong earthquake, a tsunami, a horde of Pokemon rumbling through, or a trainer just petting their Metapod a little too hard and causing them to flop over, never reaching the full glory of becoming a Butterfree. Wonder if you could shape the Metapod to evolve into something else. Hold on, bear with me, because when caterpillars enter their chrysalis, they do turn into nothing but soup, with the exception of a singular cell that then effectively jumpstarts the process of changing into a butterfly. It's an insane adaptation that, last I checked, still isn't fully understood. But I wonder if we could take all that primordial soup inside of Metapod, put it inside of something else, and with enough Pokemon energy flowing inside of it, it could still evolve into something brand new. Weird to imagine, but whatever. I had to get this thought out of my head. Our final Pokemon, and you probably expected it because I didn't talk about it till now, and it's on the thumbnail, is Meteor. A Pokemon that is destined to die no matter what we do or what it does. It is born in the stratosphere from aggregation of mutated nanoparticles, where it absorbs particulate matter from which it builds its core and durable shell. Eventually, this process makes it too heavy and it falls towards the surface of the planet. When its shell breaks from landing, Meteor's core is exposed and it becomes lighter and capable of attacking quickly. The core can be one of 7 bright colors, which is determined by the composition of the dust that it eats in the stratosphere. It cannot survive for long with its core exposed, and it will eventually die if not placed inside a Pokeball quickly enough. Despite this, many fallen Meteor attempt to return to space, sadly being unable to, as all they can do is fade away without their shells. The only thing that can save Meteor is placing it in a Pokeball, a man-made contraption that will then only release them into a PC. They're released within the Pokeball, they can continue to be happy to some degree, as there are some Pokeballs with commodities inside of them, and all of their space dust will be properly contained, meaning that they won't just actually pass away at any point, but it feels like a big cage. Meanwhile, if a certain professor wants to take this Meteor out of a PC and wants to interact with it in a lab setting, it would only be a matter of time before the Meteor is reduced once more to nothing but space dust. I genuinely believe that Meteor, for this reason, is the weakest of all Pokemon. Sure, you might consider it part of their lifespan, but I'm willing to say that both of us can be correct if you believe that. But what do you think? If you're new and made it to the end here, make sure that you do subscribe. Leave a comment with your thoughts, as I love reading comments, and once again, I will be reading the best comment from the previous video. Well, there were some good, thoughtful comments, me being told I am the mystery Saja from K-pop Demon Hunters just gets a laugh out of me. So thank you, Alicia, for that. An extra thank you to those supporters, members of the channel and Patreon, and once again to ExpressVPN for sponsoring this video. Make sure you follow the link or the QR code on screen so that way you can protect yourself and your entertainment is how I would like to say it. But with that then, as always, don't do anything I wouldn't do. Don't do anything I would do. Please be nice to each other. I love you, and I will see you next time. Bye!